You can get 10 people sing the same song and they'll always deliver it, even if they're attempting to mimic it as closely as possible. But they'll always come up with 10 different versions. And that's, I think, what that's what I was honoring in my talk. And I felt like this is a way of resolving personal authenticity with the authenticity to style or tradition, is that in fact, it's upon you. It's really incumbent upon you to add to that tradition. And that's what you do.
Louise.
You bring something. It doesn't matter how small it is. It doesn't have to be original. You don't have to strive for that. You just actually have to be yourself.
This is A Voice, a podcast with Dr. Gillyanne Kays and Jeremy Fisher.
This is A Voice.
Hello and welcome to This is A Voice Season 7, Episode 11.
The podcast where we get vocal about voice.
I'm Jeremy Fisher.
And I'm Dr. Gillyanne Kays.
And we have a guest with us, so looking forward to this conversation. This is composer, jazz person, educator, past president of the British Voice Association, all-round nice person, Louise Gibbs.
And can I add, thought provoker?
Yes.
Ooh.
Hello, Louise.
Hello, Louise.
Hello, Gillyanne. Hello, Jeremy. Thank you so much for having me.
We all met again because we've known you for a long time, but we met again at the Global Connections Conference, which was the British Voice Association, the Association of Teachers of Singing, the National Association of Teachers of Singing from America, and the European Voice Teachers Association, all of which is a mouthful. But you gave the keynote speech on the beginning of day 2, and I was so thrilled with your topics. So we're going to pick your brains on authenticity, performance, and style and stuff like that.
Can I just throw something into the mix right away? Because it reminds me of a series of posts on a forum that I was on. Somebody posted a singer singing, "I Don't Know How to Love Him." And lots of the CCM teachers really liked it. I disliked it because I said it wasn't authentic to the reason why the music was written. I couldn't get any story from it. I just had a vague kind of fuzzy emotion. And it was really interesting to see how people from different genre backgrounds responded to that performance and said, "Oh no, but I think she's being really authentic to herself." And I said, "But she's not honouring the authenticity of the original composition." That just seems like a really tangible way to start us off on that chat.
Okay, Louise, thoughts?
What was behind my talk? And I think I mentioned the philosopher Peter Kivy. And he actually talks about authenticity because many years ago when I was at Goldsmiths, I taught a philosophy of music course. I co-taught that with a person called Tony Pryor. And we had a whole number of topics, but authenticity was one of them. Peter Kivy makes this distinction between, let's say, personal authenticity and authenticity to one's tradition and style. And so what you have there is I think there's an inbuilt conflict there, potentially, because when you have a tradition, you want to keep renewing that tradition. And that tradition can only be renewed by your creative input or by the creative input of an individual. And I suppose this is the difference between a tradition, which is a body of knowledge of practices of everything that we know about a music, about a style, about a way of doing something, and about a way of presenting it. And that's a kind of big body of knowledge. And that's why education is so important, because we get involved in that body of knowledge through education. And we learn all those things, whether kind of formally or informally taught. Like that's what on-the-job learning is. It's that informal body of knowledge, but it is still a tradition. It's still a body of knowledge. What the individual brings is because any tradition, any body of knowledge is furthered or enlarged or enhanced by the input of an individual and the input of the individuality of that person, because we know that you can get 10 people sing the same song and they'll always deliver it, even if they're attempting to mimic it as closely as possible. But they'll always come up with 10 different versions. And that's, I think, what we have to, that's what I was honoring in my talk. And I felt like this is a way of resolving personal authenticity with the authenticity to style or tradition, is that you, in fact, it's upon you, it's really incumbent upon you to add to that tradition. And that's what you
I
do.
love that, Louise.
You bring something. It doesn't matter how small it is. It doesn't have to be original. You don't have to strive for that. You just actually have to be yourself.
Oh, I've got
That's so many thoughts.
Right.
We're both exploding over here because this is so good.
Yeah.
Okay, first of all, the separation between authentic self and authentic context, I think, is fantastic because it really validates my job, which is when I'm a collaborative pianist by nature and also by training. And I know I've said this, and I think in the last podcast I said this, which is, as a collaborative pianist, I cannot play the same piece the same way for different people because that's not collaboration. That's, here is my template and you must fit it. And that's not my job. What's so fascinating about this is that we have two separate things which are related, and when they link, even when they link badly, you end up with something quite unique. And I love that because I love this about the uniqueness of every performer. You bring your entire history with you the moment you open your mouth to sing. So you get your own personal authenticity, which a lot of artists will strive for. And there was a bit in your speeches that I didn't understand. And now that you've said that, I do understand it. And I just want to share it. Because you were talking about authenticity being working within the canon of knowledge that people already have about that style. So you need to know the style and you need to know the rules behind the style. And I thought that was the bit that I went, well, hang on a minute. Because I remember coming up to you afterwards and saying, I want to play devil's advocate on this. And it was the idea that because we have so many people now who are creating music at home in their own studio, online, on the computer, and weirdly, they don't even need an audience to do it. And I think this is a massive shift from the type of music making that we were doing 20, 30, 40 years ago, where you were on tour and you had massive audiences and that was how you made your money.
The audience was in the room.
The audience was in the room. Nowadays, not only is the audience not in the room, but sometimes you don't even need an audience. And that made me wonder, do you need to know the rules of the music that you're creating, or can you literally create anything? And the answer is yes and no.
Yeah.
Because if you're going with personal artistry, that's personal artistry, that's personal authenticity. But if you're going with authenticity of the thing that you're creating, that's a separate entity. And I love that distinction. It makes so much sense to me.
So what you're saying is there's a difference between someone writing a song and uploading that and someone working an existing song, an existing composition. Is that where you're coming from?
Or even an existing style.
Yeah. But what Louise is saying is that the artist who's doing the performance, whatever type of performance is still always a co-creator.
Yes.
It's not just there's this thing on the written page and this set of expectations that we must adhere to. You are co-creating. Have we got that right? Is that
yes?
You're
co-creating, but the interesting thing is that even, like if you think of the person working alone, they're not working alone because they're working inside the forms of what they've been listening to. You don't need any formal tuition to take on board what you're hearing and to be able to reproduce it or to be able to modify it. I think that's what's interesting, is that even when people think that they're working alone, you can't be part of the conversation unless you don't have the language. And you have the language just by working. It's just, you start off imitating it. Like you think of somebody working on their own, they start from imitation. That's how we all acquire language. So, but you're taking on board harmonic language, melodic forms. You can't be said to make music if you're not familiar with musical materials.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as soon as you enter that world, then you, consciously or unconsciously, you are part of that culture.
Yeah.
And that what goes with that, because people resonate with certain types of musics, don't they? There's a social and emotional response to music. It actually connects us with other people. It's why it's so super powerful.
Yes.
And so they're engaging with that, just as you said, even if they feel or someone's told them that they're on their own, they're not. It's just a different medium.
Yes, it's just a different medium. But the activity it's just that your community then becomes extremely wide and probably unknown to you unless you follow particular artists. And that's what's interesting about young people and their listening habits. I was talking about my own history, and I was saying because of the isolation of where I was brought up, you listened to things few and far between, but you listened to them very deeply. If you had a recording, there wasn't very much around. These days, young people are just kind of we all are bombarded by music from everywhere. And I have to say that what happens is that sometimes people end up with features. And I think that's probably why some communities get either annoyed. I think probably the right reaction is to, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. I would always take it positively. I mean, some communities, musical communities, feel like their music's been appropriated or misappropriated, and they may not, think that's legitimate. But I mean, there is such a lot to take on board. I mean, just in terms of listening and the influences that are around. So that's mind blowing, I think.
That's very interesting. And I realise this is a sensitive area, what you've just said about some communities get offended if their music is reworked or appropriated. And I'd just like to tread delicately there, because I have to say, I agree with you. You wonder if at some point, if the song is out there, is the song a song?
Yeah.
And it needs a singer to sing it. And once it's out there, is that not a good thing? I just put that thought out there, because it seems to me once that's been created, even if it's just a recording and someone's heard it, then it's a gift to the wider community.
Yeah.
Okay, let me go into that, because you actually
that's an interesting one.
You said something very interesting.
And my take on that would be, it's a bit like the comment that I was saying. People sing songs associated with jazz, but that doesn't make you a jazz singer. And I think that you have to say, okay, I'm singing a song associated with this repertoire. But until you know that repertoire, I mean, call it a snobbishness amongst musicians, if you like. It would be like singing or the performance of certain liturgical works from, let's say, the 16th century. People might want them misappropriated to be used in an advertisement, or put somewhere. I don't know how it might be used. Or I mean, there are certain living musical communities. I'm thinking of the jazz community, and sometimes people will think, okay, this person sings the song very well, but there's a limit to what they do with it musically, because I think the jazz community is a very specific community, because it's about composition and it's about improvisation. So you expect that performances are not the same. And the thing is that you can misappropriate a 32 bar song from the Great American Songbook and turn it completely and utterly and sort of unrecognizably out of shape. And that's perfectly legitimate for jazz. But I think that's the difference, when there are certain things that go beyond the features of a song. And I think that's really what we're trying to get at sometimes. It's not a matter of you just take the features, the outside features, and reproduce them. And it's only when the features are reproduced that it sounds inauthentic. Sometimes, like when I hear, this is why I don't sing in a language that I don't understand. All I'd be doing would be mimicking somebody's ideas of what that language sounds like, but I don't know what it means. And that's where I think it lacks authenticity for me. And I, have been, but
because you can't interpret it
yeah,
as you.
exactly.
That is so interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
There is so much I want to unpick in this. And I'm going to start with music is essentially, music only exists when it's performed in some way or other. Because music can be written down, and that's music, that's sheet music, if you like. But even when you're, as a musician, if you're reading sheet music, even if you're not making any sounds and you're reading it in your head, you are still creating something in your head that isn't actually on the page. The page is just a map, it's a guideline. And even if something is complete oral tradition where the music is only recorded, it's never been written down, and you learn it by oral repetition, if you like, you're still doing something that is bringing you into that song. So if you like, just the very existence of music is a collaborative thing, either between paper and you, or somebody else and you, or somebody else's structure and you. So that's the first thing, which is music is designed to be performed in some way or other. You have to lift it in some way.
It's a communicative art.
Yeah.
The next thing is what you're talking about is envelopes, style envelopes. Style envelopes really fascinate me because you can take a piece of music and its first iteration, if you like, the first time it's performed, it's in a style envelope. And you can recognize the features of that style envelope that tells you it's this style or it's a mix of these styles. And that envelope can be stretched, but there's a point past which it can't be stretched and stay within that style.
Yeah.
Where it gets really fascinating, I am always...
And it doesn't mean you can't go out of style. As a matter of fact, learning to do that consciously is a fantastic exercise.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think where the fun starts is where somebody takes a song that has an existing style or history or whatever, and then pushes it so far out into a completely different style and creates something very new. And the people who know me know that one of my absolute favorite recordings, and people may not have heard of this, is Filippo Giordano singing Casta Diva, which is a Bellini aria from the 19th century, at pitch with a pop style. I absolutely love it.
Yep, singing some of it in chest voice, kind of
so
breathy,
amazing.
nasal.
It is absolutely not what will be sung in the opera. It would not be sung like that in context. No. It wasn't how it was written. It wasn't how it was designed to be sung, but she still made something extraordinary. And I think that's where... And this is where what's so fascinating is she is against the artistry or the authenticity of the song itself, but she is completely authentic in what she's doing. And I love that juxtaposition. I love it.
Yeah. It sounds to me like real creativity.
Yeah.
Which comes from borrowing, putting something in a completely new situation. It's I think it's a very brave thing to do. And it's interesting because sometimes it will come off extremely well. And other times it will just fall flat. But I would imagine that it works because that person is just a really good pop singer.
Yeah. Yeah. The next question really is training.
Yes, because...
How do you train people to be authentic in either or both of those areas, to the music and to themselves?
I was thinking in particular, you were talking, Louise, about how much music there is to listen to. One could simply be overwhelmed by what's out there. And you are working in a couple of training institutions at the moment. Is that right?
Yes, I'm working. I've got about 4 universities that I'm associated with.
How are you helping these young performers navigate the contemporary world and finding themselves and yet giving them enough language, if you like, to be able to create something that is authentic for them?
The first thing always begins with them. I think the thing is when we know dealing with words, for me it always begins with words. If you want to reach people directly, because if you're just dealing with, let's say, teaching the piano, that's a more abstract connection with emotion. But if you're dealing with words, one of the things is that people have to get to know themselves. And I had a very funny experience recently with a student, and I was saying, She was singing this song about, oh God, I've forgotten what the song it's from. I think it's from a musical, but anyway, it's about destroying somebody's car that you're broken up with. And I said,
Okay.
you have to feel rage. I said, at one point you really loved this person and then they ran off with somebody else. And now, the way you're so full of rage that you're getting back at them. And she said, after a kind of like a silence, she says, oh, I've never been in love with anybody. And I went, oh God. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Okay.
The whole premise of the whole understanding is like you've gone out the window. And I said, so I said, okay, do you have a dog? Mercifully, she did. So, like, do you see what I'm saying? Is you're having to do that. What is it? A bit of archaeology. Go back, but it always starts there. And I'm also trying to get people to say, well, they're sad. And I say, okay, there's different kinds of sadnesses and there's different things that you can be sad about. It's not just happy or sad. And I'm trying to get people to explore the nuances of a particular emotion. Like even feel rage. If you feel rage, there's different kinds of ways to feel rage. And this is very interesting because a lot of young people, they're horrified that I might be encouraging them to think about rage. It's like, because they edit themselves to such a high degree sometimes. I'm sure you find this. Once we get to know each other, it's wonderful what so many people have inside them and the stories that they can tell and the things that come out, the things that they can draw upon. And that helps them really to give that detail of personal expression. And it's basically to get them to think about what they really feel and to find words to be able to articulate it and to realize that it's a perfectly legitimate, if not desirable, thing to do in relation to being an artist, because one of the conditions that you may remember, I put up the conditions or the identifiers of an artist is that they know themselves. That doesn't mean that they know always about themselves, because sometimes it can be so badly behaved. You wish they'd know themselves better, but they know about what they're doing. Most artists that I know, I think every artist that I know is quite an acute observer of human behavior and human morals and all these, I think, important things that are they're in the current, and we have to draw upon them if we want to be good artists. If we want to be artists at all, we have to take things seriously. There's always a moral and a complex under everything that we're singing. That for me is a place to start. I know I haven't mentioned very much technique, but it's a way to get things started in that department because we have to develop that.
Do you know what's so interesting about the idea of technique here? Which is, if you like, technique is the ability to repeat or reproduce something that is basically artistic.
Yes.
And that's why I'm really pleased that you start with, in this conversation, we've started with the artistry point, which is your feelings, your emotions, your opinions, your self-expression, your ideas, and they're all yours. And that's why this is, in a way, people can do this. They can do it without knowing themselves at all. The question then is, can they repeat it?
Yeah.
And this is where really the singing teacher comes in or the vocal coach comes in. Because it's like, and having just worked in the recording studio, and I know I was telling you this last Friday, we were in the studio helping somebody record their album. And we were taking 6 or 7 different takes that they'd done and basically stitching the whole thing. It's knitting. Right. I love it. Stitching the whole thing together. And I said, what we ended up with was a version that she'd never sung.
Yes.
She'd actually sung all the notes and all the phrases in that version, but she'd never sung that version. And part of the trick, if you like, is to then listen to that version and learn how to sing it.
Absolutely. That's what's so fascinating. And the thing is that the whole thing about artistry is that, and this is where it removes from the personal authenticity, because you have to start with personal authenticity. What you're doing is you're working, however you describe it, within a musical form or a musical practice. And it has not only the kind of external hallmarks of what it sounds like, but it actually has a way of doing things. So what we're doing as teachers, as educators, is we're giving people the tools to be an artist, which means to, as you say, it's repetition, but it's reliability. Because
Yeah.
if you it's all very well having ideas about what you want to say or what you want to express, but if you don't have the tools to do it, and if you don't have a form within which it's done, there are two things. You have neither the technique to deliver it, and also this is what was an important aspect, and I think it's very few people really talk about this, is that you have the way of evaluating whether what you're doing is viable or not. And that's the only way that you can say, okay, this is a good version of that, or it's not a good version of that. And I think that's what's interesting, because to be able to make a decision about which parts you save and which parts and that are going to make that perfect performance, as it were, you have to have a critical faculty, and that ability to evaluate comes from being inside the artistic practice.
That's really interesting, yes.
I think yes. And I love that you referred to what we did in that session. And I can tell you, in fact, that the singer has shared with me today that the two most recent performances she did after doing the recording sessions went incredibly well.
That's so good.
As a result of that process.
Before we go on, can I just say that the very thing that we were listening to when we were piecing all of the performances together was energy flow. It's like, there's the energy, here's the arc of that energy, that fits beautifully in there. We know where we're going with that phrase. The emotions are all working, and that was why we got such good results from piecing everything together, because the energy arc of the song worked.
And we were very fortunate because we had a wonderful engineer, quite a young guy,
so good,
whose attitude straight away was, I'm listening for a performance that works.
Yeah.
So I'm not listening necessarily for accuracy. Things can be moved around.
Yeah.
And so what we started to do was note the performances that had something.
Yeah.
And
we
those
do
moments.
that in teaching.
We do. Last week I was examining, and it's always interesting because I'm the external assessor. This is an institution that I'm dropped in, and I'm like third voice, and it's fascinating because I'm doing just that. And let's unpick the arc, because this is fascinating, and the energy flow. So on a technical point, isn't it? We know, and I mean, I do it myself. I'm saying, okay, sing whole sentences or sing whole phrases. And that's what you want, isn't it? You're not worried about an instant. I make this distinction in my students, and it's helped them a great deal, between study, practice, rehearsal, performance. So
Love it already.
Very nice.
And I'm going around that, and I'm saying, okay, here we're just studying it. We're studying how to make that sentence or how to make that phrase start here and then go there. So, for instance, give it a start. I've got a strategy for starting, which I call the onset preparation, and it's just something that puts people in mind of what they have to do so that they know how it's going to start. The sound of the feel of the opening vowel, and then we've already checked that they've got what I call abdominal puff. So we've got da, 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 and that's before any sound. So that, on a technical level, that's that. So we've got started. Okay, we've launched off, and then this idea of trajectory. It's so important, isn't it? Because it's about flow. As soon, or talking about like rhythmic expression of that phrase. What's the rhythm? What's the rhythmic pattern of that phrase? Bup boody bodoo da. It's not just bup, and it's not dit or whatever. It's bup doody badoo da. And then we will say, okay, bup doody badoo da. And it's got its high perts, and it's just dealing with things like that. These are all things that as teachers we're dealing with, all these tiny little pieces, but we know that there's a bigger plan or a bigger idea. And we're talking,
Yes.
all the components that we have identified of what's going to help somebody understand the notion of that flow or energy flow. Because
Yes.
I mean, I know I'm talking to you. I'm talking to people who know absolutely, because I see your work and I just look at it and marvel, and I think, oh, how wonderful is that? And I love the way you do it so discreetly, so that it's almost like invisible stitching. It's like,
Thank you.
it's like you put all those parts together and nobody even knows. And I know some of it because I do it myself, and also a lot of teaching. And I go, oh, it's like seeing something made you think, oh my God, that's so elegantly said, or that's so elegantly put together, or that's so clever. Or you're saying something over here, but it's referring to something over here, which will come up later. I just love this. But
thank you for that.
Yes.
That's a lovely compliment.
You're seeing
especially
the structure underneath it.
Especially coming from you.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes what happens, when we go out and we do stuff, and I think it's very easy for someone to watch and go, oh, but they didn't do this, they didn't do that, they didn't do the other. And
that's what's smart about it, isn't it?
Yeah, we think so.
I think it's very smart. And it's like, it's all your own work. And I mean, in the end, it's all their own work anyway. It's not anything you do. It's what our students do, isn't it? It's always their own, because they're the ones going through this process. We're just, midwives.
Yeah, they're the ones standing up.
There's a thought.
Yes.
We're midwives.
I quite like the idea of being a midwife.
Well, you could be a midwife.
It's my new title. I'm a vocal midwife. We need to do a temporary wrap. We have got so much in this episode, and we're going to have to stop and bring you back again next week.
Yes, please.
So we'll see you next week, Louise. Bye.
Bye then.
This is A Voice, a podcast with Dr. Gillyanne Kays and Jeremy Fisher.